Find your way to your seats. I'm going to put you directly in the hands of our mayor for our welcome.
Good morning. I'll be brief. I want to thank everybody for coming out today. When I look around the room, I see, first of all, gathered leadership from so many of our different organizations, employers, social service agencies, and law enforcement. It's so important that we have the law enforcement community here, and it's also important that we recognize that youth violence is not only a law enforcement issue. It is a community problem calling for a community solution, and that's why it's a great sign that there are interested members from the community as well as gathered leaders on the Anti-Violence Commission who represent so many different segments of the community. One of the things that we stressed at our first Anti-Violence Commission meeting is the importance of using an evidence-based approach. We don't have to reinvent the wheel, and we know that we need to change our approach. We can't simply arrest our way out of the problem. We need to look for solutions that have worked and that are proven. And we are turning to our fellow members of the broader community of people dealing with these issues, represented by the National Network for Safe Communities, who can share approaches that have worked in communities like Cincinnati, communities like High Point, North Carolina, communities like Boston. Now, new communities like South Bend, like Chicago, are turning to these examples to see what we can learn from them. And that's why there will be an introduction in a moment, but we're very grateful for guests who have come with us to join us in the fight against violence and to help us gather some of the best information we can about what works. Today we're going to hear from these experts on what has been able to make a difference. We're also going to have a chance for members of the community to weigh in and to present questions, and I'm very much looking forward to it. So I'm going to get out of the way, turn it over to our co-chairs, Police Chief Teachman and Reverend Miller, to provide the introduction of our guests.
Let me also say good morning and welcome to all of you that are here. My name is Ron Teachman, Chief of Police here in South Bend. If you don't have an agenda in front of you, let me just briefly say what we hope to accomplish today. We are in the process of beginning a program here in South Bend, having formally brought together a commission, having spread the handbook, if you will, through all the commission members. But for me, it's so much easier to look to a neighbor or a friend who's doing an initiative that I'm interested in and say, how did you do it? What obstacles did you face? What little successes did you build on? How did you gain momentum? Who did you include? What can you do better if you had to do it over again? We're so grateful that our neighbors in Chicago have been willing to come down and share their experience with us to help us get started, as I'm sure they did with other cities before them, and paying it forward. And hopefully we'll be in a position someday to do the same. So this is the plenary session for the next hour or two. You'll hear a presentation, and there'll be a time for questions and answers. Commission members, if you're not seated already, there are reserved seats up front to identify you as commission members. And for the general public, we welcome your questions as well. We ask that you find these cards on your seat. If you don't have one, they'll be distributed to you, and you can write down your questions that we'll collect at the end of the presentation to give to our presentation guests to answer those questions rather than field them from the floor. Secondly, after this plenary session, there'll be 2 breakout groups. Now, if you please raise your hand if you're on the social services side of the house. Okay. We're trying to get a head count because we have 2 different rooms that have PowerPoint technology, and we're deciding who's going to stay in this room, who's going to the next room. But at the end of this, the law enforcement side of the room will be in one breakout session with some law enforcement officials from Chicago. And the social services side will have a separate meeting. So after this general public meeting, there'll be 2 meetings, private meetings, one for law enforcement and judiciary and then one for the social services side. And we'll come up and explain where we're going from here after that. My final comment, before I turn this over to Bishop Miller, my co-chair, is to thank the Kroc Center for being such generous hosts. I was actually surveying some folks as they were coming in this morning and asked if they've ever been in this building before, and surprisingly, many of you have not. So if you like, we'll be happy to arrange for a tour of the building. The Kroc is very proud of this facility, and they want to share that with you. So after we're done with our sessions, both the group session now and the separate meetings later, we'll be happy to accommodate you on a tour, or you're welcome to explore this building on your own. Thank you again, Bishop Miller.
Thank you, Chief Teachman. Again, extend a word of appreciation to all of you that have taken time out of your schedule to be here. And I have a certain personal investment in this, and I appreciate the level of confidence that the Mayor and Chief Teachman have extended in me. But I have personally been affected by violent crime, as I've stated on a time of different too, that I lost my sister through a violent gang shooting, mistaken identity. I lost my brother-in-law, who was a missionary in South Africa, through a violent stabbing incident. I had a niece of mine ran over by a drunk driver and drove down the street, and he took off. So I have a personal interest in addressing violent crime. We're so honored today to have Mr. Christopher Millett here with us today, that comes to us with a wealth of knowledge and experience. And I'm just going to take a moment just to read his bio. It says, Christopher Millett, Executive Director of Chicago Violence Reduction Strategy at Jay College of Criminal Justice, Center for Crime Prevention and Control. Christopher Millett is the Executive Director of the Chicago Violence Reduction Strategy. The Chicago Violence Reduction Strategy seeks to dramatically reduce group and gang violence in the city of Chicago. The Violence Reduction Strategy is a joint effort of the Center of Crime Prevention and Control at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, the Chicago Police Department, the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Cook County State Attorney's Office, the Illinois Department of Corrections, the West Side Health Authority, the Safer Foundation, Teamwork Inglewood, and a variety of community and faith-based partners. Prior to assuming this role with the John Jay College of Criminal Justice, Mr. Millett served as in the Mayor's office as the Director of Community Safety Initiatives, where he focused upon youth violence prevention, juvenile justice, gang intervention and prevention, and ex-offender reentry initiatives. Before his appointment to the Mayor's office, Mr. Millett served as the Executive Director of Chicago's Juvenile Intervention Support Center. Also, Mr. Millett has devoted his life to the advocating for social justice and serving residents and children in urban communities. He has also served the City of Chicago as an Assistant Corporation Counsel, the Faith Community of St. Sabina, as General Counsel, Executive Director of Youth Center and Athletic Director, and the Chicago Public Schools as a Magnet Schools Cluster Coordinator. He has been featured guest on ABC's Nightline, the CBS Evening News, Fox in the Morning, news broadcast, CNN, Fox News, Hannity, and Combs. Mr. Millett is a Princeton University graduate, received his law degree from the University of Pennsylvania School of Law. Christopher and his wife, Kendall, have 4 children, Luke, age 15, Zion, age 13, Judah, age 8, and Levi, who is 5 years old. Mr. Millett also volunteers as a football coach for the Whitney Young High School, as well as the sport of choice for all of his children. God bless you. We're so honored to have him here with us today. I think we ought to receive him and his wealth of knowledge with a hearty hand praise. Can we do that today?
You got 4 boys, anybody, you can relate to that. If you have children, what might happen.
it's interesting too. First, I want to thank Mayor Pete Buttigieg for having me here. I want to thank Kara Kelly and the mayor's staff for this wonderful reception. The Kroc Center, certainly, for having us. Rose Meissner with the Community Foundation of St. Joe's County. It's great to be in St. Joe's County. And I want to thank you for that and just how you guys have welcomed us in. And certainly Ron Teachman, the police chief, the welcome reception we've gotten there as well. But so I move around a lot, so I hope none of you guys, if it bugs you, I'm sorry. I'm just going to be bothered for the next hour. Perfectly, I'll be done in an hour, and we'll have an hour for questions and answers. We are just up the road 60 or 90 minutes. Depends on who's driving on that given day. But we're up to say, since we have a lot of law enforcement presence in the room, we're 90 minutes up the road. So we're available to come back. So it's not you have us for an hour and that's the end of it, or 2 hours and that's the end of it. This is something, I heard you guys had 18 homicides in South Bend. That's a lot. I'm from Chicago, we're in Chicago. I don't make it any point about puffing out my chest and bragging about how many shootings and homicides we have. That is a horrible, horrible thing to be known for. What I can tell you is that it's not as bad as the media points it out and makes it out to be. It never really is. And if I could quote an old Notre Dame coach, Lou Holtz, I go to lots of coaching conventions, and Coach Holtz once said, "You're never as good as the media says you are, you're never as bad as the media says you are." You just need to know who you are. If I could quote Matt Brown, a friend of mine who's the head coach at Texas, and he said to me at one point, I asked him, "How do you coach all these kids? Like, help me, I'm on the south side of Chicago. How do I lead 120 young men?" And he said to me, "You don't have to lead them all, you just got to figure out who your bell cows are." And I said, "What in the world are you talking about, bell cows? I'm a city guy. I'm born and raised in North Jersey, and I've lived in Chicago the last 20 years. What is a bell cow?" And he said, "The bell cow is the cow when you got to go out and you got to bring the cows in. You don't grab the whole head of cattle. You just go get the bell cows. Everybody else follows the bell cow." He said, "In any group you'll find, if you got a group of 120, there'll be about 3 or 4 leaders. Figure out who those 3 or 4 leaders are, son. Those are your bell cows. You get those bell cows to buy into what you're selling, all of a sudden everybody's going to start following." And I think that that's part of what we're looking at here. There's something I think we have, we're not selling it, we give it away freely. We give it away freely because, like Chief Teachman said, it's our obligation to pay it forward. This is something that's the beauty of what we're going to talk about today, is that it's apolitical. It's designed by design. It's designed to outlast, no offense, Mayor, it's designed to outlast political tenure. No offense, Chief. It's designed to outlast police chief tenures. Because we know at the end of the day, like I was told when I was an athlete, that, enjoy your time in this program, but remember, everybody rents their locker. And I think we all rent our locker here on earth, to be honest with you. At some point in time, it's somebody else's turn. And it's our obligation to make sure that we build something that's sustainable. That doesn't die when we die, and doesn't end when we move on to another program or something like that. So I come before you humbly, just to share what I came from Chicago, from our experience. And you may not hear this a lot, because a lot of times you bring in speakers and they come in and talk about all their success. And I'm here because I'm so successful and I'm so accomplished. And we've done so much good. Hopefully, I hope that I can share with you how many times we've crashed this jet plane and burned it. And how many times we failed. Because it's those failures that allow us to really take a good peek at what's really going on here. And when we start to figure out, because you're never going to solve it. If I have cancer, I don't want to go to the doctor. The doctor says, "Hey, keep smiling. Just eat right, enjoy your." I want to know what's my situation here, and what caused it. What caused the situation, and how do we cure the situation? So that's kind of what we get at when we're talking about our the Chicago Violence Reduction Strategy. There we go. So I'm going to give you guys in the next hour a brief overview of what we do, what the implementation actually looks like when it's up and running. It takes far too much time. I'm not going to get into governance. I'm not going to really delve into the political piece of it or anything like that. And the question and answer, if you want to go down that road, we can go down that road. But I wanted to give you guys all an overview of what this is, what we're actually talking about, what this book looks like, the Don't Shoot book, when it's implemented. and when you put it into practice? What are the challenges? You know, I will tell you this, St. Joe's County and the city of South Bend, you are way ahead right now. Just having this meeting, you're way ahead. Not because I'm here and our team is here from Chicago, but because you already have the Anti-Violence Commission in place. You know, it's not perfect. I have the news for you. It's never going to be perfect. You're never going to have all the answers. You're never going to have all the right people. There's always going to be someone missing at the table. There's always going to be someone at the table that probably shouldn't be there any longer. It's never going to be perfect. But the hardest thing to do is to get started. Once you get this thing started and you get it moving and operating, and people at the table are sincere and authentic. They're sincere and authentic. What we look at is we usually look at 3 meetings. First meeting, everybody. People yell, holler, scream. It's okay. I understand the frustration around homicide and violence. I was asked by Don Lemon at CNN in an interview about 3 years ago, what's your acceptable number of homicides in Chicago? And I said, what kind of a question is that? I said, 0. And he said, no, really, it's Chicago, really, like 100, 125, what's an acceptable number? And I said, you know, it might be 125 to me, but if her son or her daughter is 125, she's going to say what? 124. So on and so forth all the way down the road. Not to mention all the collateral violence that happens when someone loses a life. You know, we looked at an initiative we started about 4 years ago in Chicago when someone loses their life on the street to gun violence and how we respond to it. Because how long is the body laying there on the ground? How many kids go by that body? How many neighbors see that body? And then the officers as well. There's violence around young people. What about the people who touch those young people's lives? The teachers, the counselors, the coaches, the ministers. Who's talking to them? We just assume we go in and we do provide services to the immediate family. And we provide immediate services to that family as long as we can, and then we branch off because here comes another one. There's a horrible media story, and if everything's focused on this, and someone comes in and an athlete steps up, and a university jumps in, and then all of a sudden it happens over here, and we shift our focus over here a little bit to the west side, or the south side, or the east side, or wherever we may be. The beauty of what we're going to talk about now is that it's a strategy. We call it the violence reduction strategy, simply because we want people to understand this is not an initiative. It's not another program. It's a strategy. And the beauty of the strategy is that as I talk, you might recognize some of the things I'm talking about. Because most jurisdictions you already do most, if not all, of what we're talking about. On the law enforcement side of it, you'll see this is what you do every day. This is what you've been doing for years, for decades. But what this does is the strategy provides a very convenient excuse for all of our government agencies, all of our churches, all of our social service agencies. You now have an excuse to work together. You no longer have a reason to silo yourselves or anything. You now get an excuse to work together. I don't want to work with Hurley, but you know what? It's to drop the homicides. You know, that's why I say it's apolitical. You know, it's something no one really owns it. When it really gets going, the community, the age, everybody owns it. It kind of becomes a way of life. It's a way that we deal with public violence, because that's what we're talking about here. You know, and I'll caution you, I'm not talking about robberies, I'm not talking about rapes, I'm not talking about domestic violence cases. I'm talking here, and we deal specifically with group violence and the dynamics of group violence. In Chicago, that accounts for about 75 to 85% of our violence every year. The gangs, the factions, the cliques, the crews, whatever you want to call it. And even what we used to see is interpersonal violence. Tom and I get in it, and Deb is the object of our argument. And then Tom knocks me down to the ground in front of everybody, and I'm embarrassed. So I go and I get Rose and I get my group over here. Because I don't know how to deal with it. I'm not equipped. That's where that prevention piece comes in. So it's not just enforcement. You know, I look at it as, we have 3 main tiers in what we do, but it's really, you look at it as 4. You know, that's how I've gone and looked at this over the last 20 years or so. You want to be working prevention, intervention, enforcement, and reentry. Reentry meaning folks coming home from prison, jail, juvenile justice. Even with juveniles. Juveniles get arrested, that's almost like for them, that's almost like going to the county. You know, county jail. You know, it's how do we deal with that when they come home? So, You have to work all these things together. So the violence reduction strategy. All right. You start walking the floor now, huh? That's a prayer reference. Why we're here. This is how we end up where we end up. So we're working full-blown. There's 22 police districts in Chicago. About 12 of them account for about 80% of our public violence, meaning shootings. I'm talking about shootings and homicides. So where do we go? We go, right now we're in 5 districts doing a full-blown implementation. We go where you see the bodies. Each one of those blue dots represents, it's a picture of a gun, it represents a hole in a body. That's a brother or sister, an uncle and aunt, a mother or father, who has a hole in it from a gunshot wound. The red dots are those lives that we've lost. This is one particular district about 2 years ago. So when we go in, we actually take a look. It's not based on where the chief wants to go. It's not based on where the mayor thinks we should go. It's not based on where the loudest minister is and the largest congregation has a public outcry. It's not based on what we think is really going on. There's some gut reactions and there's some visceral things that happen. But we try to move from that and look at the data as well. This district clearly has an issue. All right, this is the 6th police district in Chicago a couple of years ago. We're dealing in there, we're still in there right now. This is a unique district in that a lot of the people that are pulling triggers and involved in some of the violence, we have a relatively younger gang population there. When you look at what's going on, you do have to assess, and this is why it's important to pay close attention to your partners. You know, law enforcement will tell you on the west side of Chicago, it's mostly about drugs, narcotic sales, because it's a convenient location for people to come in and come out. They can come in off the train, they can come in off the elevated tracks, they can come in out of the suburbs, and they can come in off the expressway. So they like to dip in and dip out. So a lot of the violence is driven by narcotics trade. South side's a little bit different. It also gets different when you get into the culture of your organizations that you're working with. I don't say gangs in Chicago because a gang to me is maybe 100-something people. We have organizations of tens of thousands of people. You know, at that point you're in a street organization. You know, it's the home place, the birthplace of a number of different organizations. I'm not going to run through the names because I'm not going to honor that lineage and all that type of stuff. You know, those of you who know, you know. But at the end of the day, and Tom will talk about it when we get into the small breakout sessions, those who stay for the social service and community session. You know, it's more of a lifestyle thing. You know, it's a culture of the street more than it is your groups. Your groups, your factions, your cliques, your crews. It's important to see how that group dynamic is working. But psychologically, you understand that it's not about colors. I can't tell you how frustrated I get when I go to gang workshops and gang seminars, and the whole focus is on the colors and the names and the graffiti. You know, that's a part of it, yes. But the code, to breaking the code, is getting into the culture. You know, we have 2 groups of Latino gangs on the southwest side of Chicago. And there's actually a lineage of those gangs that goes back to a village in Mexico. And they carry it to Chicago when they immigrate to Chicago. And the guys that were on this side are 2-6, and the guys that are on this side become Latin Kings. But it's that same Hatfield-McCoy type of mentality that they're carrying. Well, when you attack that from an enforcement standpoint, but also, and just equally as important from a prevention and intervention standpoint, you have to understand what's causing this. Where is this coming from? What's generating this? Because if you're chasing colors and flags and names and symbols on either end, not just law enforcement, I'm talking to the prevention people and the intervention people right now as well. If that's what you're chasing, you're going to lose. I'll tell you right now, because I chased it for a while. And I'm telling you, you're going to lose. You're never going to win that game. Because that game just flips, they flip the script left and right. You know, you got to get at the core, what's really driving it. So this is how we end up where we end up. We actually take an honest look, and you have to be honest. Like, I didn't finish what I was saying about Mac Brown. I told you about the bell count. But I also asked him, like, what are the rules you put into place? Because if I put in rules like no drinking, no sex, gotta go to class, gotta maintain a certain GPA, to be honest with you, in some schools where I've coached, we would have no team. You know, we would have no team. I mean, and it's not a judgment on anybody, but that's just where we are. And that's what Mac Brown said to me. He said, you know, stealing. I've never understood two things. Well, three things really. Hitting girls or women, I've never understood that, number one. But number two, stealing and littering. I don't understand littering. Like really? Like you're that disinvested in where you are that you're gonna just throw garbage on the ground? Like really? I just don't understand it. And stealing. But I asked Coach Brown, I asked, what do you do? Like, how do you get guys like, he said, son, who we are. He said, them boys are who them boys are. And he said, the best you can do by some of these young men is get them half right. He said, you got them at 17, you're getting them at 15, 16 years old. I get them at 18, 19 years old. If you could get that boy half right before he leaves your program, you've done more of a service to him than most people will in his lifetime. And he might take himself the rest of the way. But trying to fix everything is not going to work, especially if you're trying to fix it on your own. So what we do is we look at, we are who we are. This district is what this district is. We can't sit around and say, yeah, but it's so-and-so's fault. Oh, well, yeah, historically, there's been a lot of police brutality, and the CIA dropped drugs in the black community, and we can't say, the police just want to come in here as an occupied territory, and they just want to lock up all of our young men and cut the head of the black community off. Those are two narratives that run, and you've heard them before. There's a law enforcement narrative that these guys aren't going to do anything about the violence, and they won't snitch because they're making money off of it. They're profiting off of it. They deal with the violence. It's part of their life. You hear the community narrative that they're just trying to lock everybody up, and they really don't care for us. And if they care for us, they live in our neighborhood. And cops don't live in our neighborhood. Our teachers don't live in our neighborhood. Our politicians don't live in our neighborhood. So we're going to disassociate ourselves because it's not really part of us. And you got these two narratives constantly butting heads. Well, this strategy gives you an opportunity to bridge a gap between them. But like Coach Brown said, you are who we are. We have an ugly history. Some of our history, we have a great history in Chicago. No offense to you South Benders, but I love Chicago. I think it's the greatest city in the world. And when we get together on things, nobody can stop us. But we're so tribal. And that's the thing, but you know what? We're not the only ones. How tribal is South Bend if you really think about it? I don't know. But we got to move beyond that. This strategy, again, it gives you a very convenient excuse to sit down at the table together and discuss the narrative. Sit down. Why do you hate the police? Why? Well, why do you hate the police? You hate them just because you think you're supposed to hate them? Because really, that's the way a lot of us actually think. We don't get our politics anywhere but at the kitchen table when we're kids. So where is it coming from? But that's why we end up where we end up. So as wonderful as we are, and as great as we are to be around, you really don't want us coming into your district. Because when we come knocking on your district and we show up at your district commander's door, there's a situation here that's problematic. Go the other way. All right, so this is a nationally recognized model. We didn't come up with it in Chicago. David Kennedy, Professor David Kennedy at John Jay College of Criminal Justice, began this in Boston in the mid-90s, and public safety circles, it's referred to by some as the Boston Miracle, where there was a reduction in 50% homicides citywide for about 3 years, and a reduction in juvenile homicides of about 65–70%. And they sustained it for about 3 years. What happened at the end of those 3 years? People are doing books about it right now, a lot of research on it, but what I will say to you from my observations is it was a political cycle ended. And when the political cycle ended, everybody started claiming credit for it. And that's when it started to fall apart. The mayor started to say, no offense, I love Mayor Menino. I've worked with him in the past at the Department of Justice, and I think he's a great leader and for a great city. But, when the politicians took credit for it, I reduced it. I'm going to run on this. I reduced this, and this is what happened. And the police said, wait a minute. We're the guys out there every day with our lives on the line with these clowns. And we're the ones that are getting it done. And then the minister said, but, we're the ones that are connected to the community. Y'all really don't have the connections we have. And then the street intervention guy said, we're the ones that are dealing with the gang members and having a real conversation. You're just locking them up. You're just preaching to them on Sunday. And then it just started to fall apart. But where it really fell apart was I had a chance to talk to someone who was a security guard at a hospital. And he put up a crate. Remember those crates nailed to the the basketball rim, just nail a crate to the telephone pole. He put up one of those crates, and he would let the gang members shoot baskets in the alley behind the hospital. And they'd stay out there from 10 at night to about 2 in the morning, just shooting buckets on that little crate, a little rundown basketball. And he said, you know what, if this is what they think, because he knows what he's doing, because he's got 15, 20 guys a night coming out there, instead of doing whatever else they might be doing. So he took the crate down and said, I'm not putting my neck out on the line for this, if I'm not going to have any support. And that gives you a sense of, you know, where not to go with this thing, you know, and what really makes it work. But since '95, it's been going. It's in dozens of cities across the country. I think it's over 70 jurisdictions now. We began this in Chicago in August of 2010. So we're coming up on our third year anniversary. And then the last piece there, strong partnership. You have to develop these partnerships. They're not going to be strong out the gate. Like I said, you're way ahead of the curve by meeting today, by having your commission, and by addressing the issue. You know, the key is, are you going to be honest? You know, if you're going to be honest with your problems in South Bend, you're going to go a long way reducing, getting some significant reductions back. But if you don't want to be honest, if you want to, you know, well, this is South Bend, we don't want people to not come to here, and, you know, it's a closed door session. Right? I know we have the media here right now and whatnot, but when you're really operating, you're operating in a closed door session. And when you get that trust amongst the partnership agencies, all types of wonderful things can happen. The most wonderful being the reduction. Again, one homicide is 2 men. One shooting is 2 men. Social service agencies, who works with the group, you got to consider who's working, who you're addressing here. In our case, we're addressing gang members. If we're addressing gang members, there's one thing we know. Most of them are going to be on paper, which means they got records. They got parole, they got probation. So I need someone who can work with parolees and probation. I need someone who can understand the barriers that they're going to face, but I also need someone who can understand what they need to achieve to get off of parole and probation. And I need them to be a willing partner and an able partner. But also, we'll talk about jobs a little later, the issue with jobs. There's a lot more to it than jobs. You know, I know gang members, I personally. So I live a very schizophrenic existence. Because I work with the police chief, I work with the mayor's office, the governor's office, all the alphabet agencies of the Department of Justice, ATF, FBI, DEA, HUD, IRS. But then I also work with gang members themselves. I coach a lot of their kids along the way. I coach some of them, you know, to date myself just a little bit along the way. You know, so I have to have a very strong filter because who I'm speaking with. And know, you know, because what you find is myself and my team, and there's other people, I'm sure there's many in this room right now, and there are also police officers who serve in this role. I call them buffers, community buffers. They're people that you'll saddle up to and say something to. You know, those people that you can trust, that you can relay information and things not bounce back to you. You know, the people you're talking to aren't going to throw you under the bus the minute it's convenient for an advancement in their career or so that I can get close to the mayor. I'll come to the mayor with some information about such and such. You know, you share the information. Don't share it to get close to anybody. And I think that's those are the people that you look for. And I put that out now just to kind of start planting that seed because you need to, as we get into the calling, which I'll show you an actual example of the calling in a few moments. You know, who do you need in the room? You know, who do you need in your partnership? Because once you start this stuff, as horrible as violence is and gangs and guns, it's also very sexy to people. I mean, what do the news media lead off with in every story? You know, they're not leading off with, you know, the minor league Padres baseball team just clinched their second consecutive T-ball championship. You know, and the little kids eating ice cream cone at the Dairy Queen. You know, no. They're going to start off with who got shot, who got killed, what scandal do we have to put up here to get people's attention. That's what they start off with. You know, that becomes the norm. So getting people to fight them. And then academic partners. It's very important to have the right academic partners at the table because you need to be able to measure this. Before you begin this, you need to know how you're going to measure this. Because the last thing anybody else wants is another anecdotal story about a gang member who turned his life right and got right with God and did such and such. Because no one wants to hear that when bodies are dropping on their block. Nobody wants to hear that when my stats are telling me as a district commander or a police chief, I got a problem here. And I don't know how to solve this problem. I know how I'm going to solve the problem, but I need some more tools. Because I know, like someone mentioned earlier, we can't arrest our way out of this thing. You know, we got to figure out a better way. What we're doing right now isn't working. So what's going to work? Whoops, I'm going the wrong way. I'll get it together. Terminology, things that you'll hear with this strategy. Focus deterrence. What's focus deterrence? It's essentially you go after the right people. We know that about 0.5% to 3% of our population drives about 70 to 80% of our wrong behavior, if you will. You know, you see that in law enforcement. If you're a teacher, you see it in the classroom. If you're a coach, you see it in your locker room. If you're a minister, you see it in your congregation. It's not everybody. You know, this is good news. We had our partner at Yale University run a study on the West Side community where we were in the 11th Police District, Garfield Park, East and West Garfield Park. 90,000 residents. We did a 5-year study from 2005 to 2010. We looked at the victimology, all the gunshot victims, and the offenders that we could pull. And we found that out of 90,000 residents in a 5-year span, 1,700 people were responsible for 80+% of the serious violence. Out of 90,000, 1,700 some odd people were responsible for 80 to 90% of their serious violence. Now, if I'm in the community, that's good news to me. Because everything I'm seeing about this is the Wild West, and it's just mayhem, and it's every man and woman for themselves. I see that's not the reality. That there's more of us than there are of them. But how do we get our handle around those guys that are causing this mayhem in the community? But focus deterrence really gives you a focus. It's really for the law enforcement partners to get at, you know, no sweeps, general sweeps, get everybody off the corner and those types. No, we know who we're looking for, and we know why we're looking for them. And you know what? Every time I pull up and see him, I'm going to get out of the car and say, hey, how you doing today? What are you doing? You know, every time I see him, I'm going to have contact with him and his group, his crew, whoever. I'm not going to put handcuffs on him. I'm not going to harass him. I'm not going to remind him of his next court date. I'm just going to make sure he knows every time I see him, we're here, man. We see you. Good to see you. Looking good today. Driving off. You know, hey, good to see you. Hey, you changed your outfit the last two hours. We'll see you later, you know? Driving off. You'd be amazed at what a difference it makes. You'd be amazed. But that's the focus deterrence piece right there. And in the community, my God, the community begins to fall in love all over again with the police. They fall in love because it's like because what's the image? Remember I talked earlier about that narrative. What's that narrative that we're growing up with? And now I'm seeing this isn't the right narrative. Like, what's he doing? Why is he polite? Why didn't he handcuff him? Why is he still on the street? Wow. And then I see it again, but they're not coming after my son or my grandson or the kids with the backpacks in them. You can't tell this. I call it urban camouflage, man. Jeans, white tennis shoes, and a white t-shirt. It's urban camouflage. So when you call it in, everybody on the corner looks the exact same. You know, I don't know who's who. That's all we got in the report. Black teenager, black male, white t-shirt, blue jeans, and white tennis shoes. And then there you go. Our poor officers show up, and there's 75 people meet the description right there on the corner. What are they supposed to do? You know? But it gets to the point where you really start to see, okay, they're not out here harassing. And then they start to realize, when the community realizes that, okay, they know who the guys are. Now, I'm not going to get into
an agenda.
That gets more into the politics and the government.
Are you here for?
No, I will say that those law enforcement partners in the room, we understand the frustration of getting the right guy repeatedly and having to get him again 12 hours later. You know, we get that. We're working on that in Chicago. It's a bigger issue than anyone in this room, really. But we can conquer. I'm sure we can conquer. But that's like pulling levers. We look at all the different ways we can come out. So again, we're looking at again. You know, I'll get into the calling piece a little bit. But what are the different levers? Is he on probation? Is he on parole? Who are his influentials? Sometimes it's more important not to talk to the individual, but to talk to the mother of his child, to talk to his grandma. I told you I'm a football coach. If I'm recruiting a kid, I'm going to sit down, I'm going to talk to the kid. And my words and my eye contact will be with this young man right here. But my message is going to be to his mother, his grandmother, his uncle, because those are the people influencing his decision-making process. So I have to be real clear on that. Police legitimacy, what we talked about just now, you know, most people, they did a study, I forget where it was, on parking, speeding tickets. And they studied in one jurisdiction, they had officers that were pulling people over for speeding tickets. And the officers that said, how are you, you know, spoke to them, not, you know, kissing their butt or just going over the top, but just being polite, just doing their job. I see your driver's license, you know, tell them, the reason I pulled you over, ma'am, or sir, is because you're speeding. I got you clocked at this, and that's why, you know, so I'm gonna have to write you a ticket today. And then, you know, they let the person vent. But the people that felt that they were treated fairly said thank you when they got their speeding ticket. You know, and wrote a positive review on their survey of the service that they're, of law enforcement in your community. You know, and it gets the kind of procedural justice piece. You know, it's not what you're doing, it's how you do what you do. You know, people understand, I'm sure the law enforcement partners in the room, you know guys, that, I mean, it's almost like you know when the birthday, well, you know their birthdays, because you've run their sheets so many times. You know their birthdays, you know where they live, but it's almost like there's a rapport that takes place. You know, I don't know if you've ever seen, we have a young rapper, Chief Keef, guy Keith Kozart in Chicago, heading down a path of destruction, quickly down this path of destruction. You know, they had a video online now. He got pulled over speeding on the expressway. You know, he got out of his little office like he knows the game. He starts with the rapport right away. You know, spreads his legs, spreads his hands. I don't have any weed on him. They know he smokes weed. He got busted for it. I don't have any weed on me tonight. There's no sharp objects in my pocket. You know, he's just going right through it. You know, trying to develop that rapport. Now, you know, unfortunately, you watch the officer's reaction with Officer Sake. They didn't lower their guard, you know, but at the same time, you know, that's the procedural justice piece. Racial reconciliation, why is that? One of the things that we're looking at is if we do this thing right, a lot of the racial tension that we have in our urban communities, in our neighborhoods, comes from, to a certain extent, a history of white law enforcement operating in minority communities. And that's what starts to build up some of that narrative. Remember I was saying, you know, folks who say you don't live here, you don't own any property, you know, so what are you doing here? You know, so if we can get to, you know, you can break things down. You know, take what was meant for evil there and what people want to use to divide and use it to unite. You know, and you can actually get to racial reconciliation through law enforcement efforts. You know, how amazing will it be if all the great minds and the great people on this earth working on how do we solve this thing, and then it gets solved by interactions between local law enforcement and civilians and citizens. Social network analysis, I'm going to get to that in a second. That's how we identify our group members and how we go after this thing. When we talk about the gang members, we're not talking about the hierarchical chart where Larry Hoover is the chairman of the board, who's the governor, who's this, who's that, who's the precept, who's the regent, who's the lieutenant, who are your street soldiers. We talk about a network analysis just like Facebook. And we actually get this from Professor Andrew Papachristos at Yale University. And he actually borrowed part of this from the United States Army, Department of Intelligence, on how they identify different insurgent groups and cells and how they operate. Because really that's what you're looking at now. You're not looking at these overarching, some places you are. Latino gangs a little bit more so than the African American gangs on a whole across the board. But you're not looking at this overarching structure, you know, where everybody's reporting up and out. You're looking at smaller groups that operate independently and have alliances and have beefs and have those types of things. You know, so it's a different way to look at it. And what we do is we actually do a network analysis to see who's connected to who, just like Facebook or LinkedIn or anything like that. And what we do with our analysis is we do it by IR numbers, by your arrest number. So I can say I know nothing about Deborah Higgins, and I don't know Deborah Higgins, but I got 4 arrests linking me to Deborah Higgins. And guess what? Turns out we're both black disciples. You know, so all this conversation about it doesn't exist, and you know, a lot of it is what I call barbershop logic. You know, there's just different ways to get at it. But the reason the social network analysis is that it really gets to the focus deterrence piece. You're not just scooping someone up because of an affiliation. You know, you're scooping them up because of a behavior that they're exhibiting. And then community moral voice. You know, David Kennedy will ask this question, and then, you know, I ask this, everyone in the room right now for 1 second. You got to engage me now. How many of you were afraid of the police when you were growing up? of your uncle, he was a cop. That doesn't count. How many of you were afraid of the police growing up? Raise your hand. Okay, a couple people. How many of you were afraid of your mother growing up? Raise your hand. If you were afraid of your mother when you were growing up. All right, almost everybody, right? That's what your moral voice is. That's your moral voice. It's your mother's voice. People know right from wrong. It's no mystery. You know, all the defense lawyers in the world, everybody knows right from wrong. Everyone knows right from wrong. All right, all prosecutors, judges, officers, the guys on the street, ministers, everybody. You know, but that moral voice, that's really what we're talking about there. And I'll describe that a little bit later. And then evidence-based practices. Those of you in the social service world, like I said, you know, we don't need anecdotal stories, we need real success. We need partners who know what success looks like and what's going to give us success. Not what's going to give us a blip on the screen, quiet people down, and get the TV cameras to go away. We need to know what's going to sustain success. So we're not sitting in this room 15 years from now starting over. Because that's what we do, right? We do something like this, and then those of you who've been around long enough, you'll say, hey, I remember this. We did this in 1980. Yeah, this is what we did in the mid-90s in response to that kid that got shot over on such and such. We got together and we did that. Yeah, it lasted about a year. You know, let's see what happens here. Let's see what happens here. We want to be able to sustain. Social network analysis. So this is the science that I was talking about. And it's really how people are connected. And we look at how their interconnections affect behavior. Like I said, on the west side of Chicago, in the 11th district, Garfield Park, you saw about 1,700 people responsible for about 80% of the serious violence over a 5-year period. Well, this is how we figured that out. We started linking the victims and linking the offenders. You look at who's arrested with who. So as you see that chart right there, they may not technically all be in the same gang faction, whatever you want to call it. They may not be in the same gang, but they're clearly connected. And you see that one guy who's closest to the lettering, closest to us there, you know, there's 4 clear connections right there. If you take that player out, can you imagine how much quieter things will get on the street? And if you take them out for the right reasons, and as you'll see, the streets, there's a lot of street chatter that goes on around the work that we do. Believe it or not, you're all known, if you're actively engaged in the community, you're all known on the street. There's maybe very few households who don't know Pastor so-and-so, Coach so-and-so, Officer so-and-so. You know, some of you, they might know your schedules. They know how you operate. They know how you flow. And they judge your legitimacy. You know, is that person sincere? Is that person authentic? Because generally, my experience is one thing that the street respects is truth. The street respects truth. I didn't say gangs or the street, the whole street. It respects truth. Someone comes honestly, comes correctly. Again, you're a police officer. Okay, let's go. Lock me up, you know, but I respect him if he's doing his job in a truthful way from my perception. You're not going to make everybody happy. This isn't a kumbaya thing, don't get me wrong, by any means. This is a very serious issue. We're talking about homicide. And when we get into the law enforcement piece, you'll see it's not a joke. And it's not we'll give you a job if you don't kill somebody. No, you don't kill people because you just don't kill people. You don't shoot people because you just don't shoot people. There's no excuses made for anybody. There's opportunities given to people. We try to eliminate excuses, give them an out, if you will, but there's no excuses here. So there's our connections, the social network analysis. This is an actual analysis of one of the districts where we started, actually the first district where we were working about 3 years ago when we started. The difference of what we're doing here is we're focusing on the group and the group dynamic. And in doing that, what we're doing is we're putting pressure on the group. So this is all about group accountability. So the pressure is, if I'm a member of a group at this whole side of the room, the promise is if any one of us commits a homicide in our group, a shooting, however you want to gauge it, you gauge it based on your local issue. So if your local issue is homicide, if we did it by shootings in Chicago, you know, we need every Chicagoan to join the police force and work on this. All right, we go by homicides right now. And then there's another one we do, also the most violent group, which is how we've grown. And that's part of the crashing and burning I talked about a little bit earlier, what we've learned. But if one person in this group commits a homicide, this whole group, every member in that linked up network is getting a concentrated focus from law enforcement. Law enforcement partnerships will be the local law enforcement. It'll also be the U.S. Attorney's Office, the DEA, the FBI, the ATF, anywhere and anywhere of the levers I was talking about. parole, probation, the court system. If you got juveniles in this group, juvenile court's going to get a special eye on it. Those group members who are connected to our group, all because one of us, let's say me, committed a homicide. And now what begins to happen is there gets to be some group accountability and group pressure. And you think, man, these guys are who they are, right? They don't care. They actually do care. You know, and I say it takes about 3 clicks. You know, you get through about 3 times with constant pressure, and you stay faithful to what you're doing, you stay faithful to the strategy. About the 3rd time, we had one district on the west side. First time, it went about 2 days. Second time, that night, 2 hours after we left the meeting with the gang members, they killed somebody. We came back about a month later. That 3rd time, we went 24 days without a homicide in that district. You know, the message was sinking in. One guy in the room after that 3rd time, one guy in the room came up and he said, hey, I hear what you're saying. I see you're not going to stop. I see this is what it's going to be. Where do I go for the services? Who's the guy I got to sign up? I got to do something different because I can't do this. Because he knows the members in this group are too unstable. And he doesn't want that pressure. Now the solution is don't break the law. If you're in this group and you're not breaking the law, you don't have to worry about the spotlight, right? But the tragedy of this is that most of the group members are group members because they share one thing in common, and that's breaking the law. And it's anti-social values and belief system that they have. So this is actually, you can see, that's one group. And in this group right here, that's actually a street on the west side of Chicago. They're all the same group. They're all linked together through their affiliation. However, the reason you see that separation is one side of the faction was responsible. They had the drug trade on one side of the street, and the other side had the drug trade on the other side of the street. So that's why you see how they're linked up in there. You see the red nodes there, those are the guys that are, you know, those are your impact people. You know, usually if you get to those impact people, you can take certain things away. We also learn from this who our nodes are. It's not number of arrests. Again, it gets into your connection. If you see right over the main body, where that red dot is, there's a silver dot. That's connecting 3 significant groups of people. From this we learn, hey, you know what? We need to know who that guy is. Because that guy has a significant connection to a lot of what's going on the street right now. And what you end up finding out as a law enforcement tool, you start to find out who's your heroin line, you know, who could be running guns. You never know. You never know. But what you do know is you start to gain more intelligence on who's connected to who. And at the end of the day, whether it's the community, it's the law enforcement, social services, what good is intelligence if we don't use it and we don't share it? Not that you share everything. There's certain things social service cannot share with law enforcement cannot share with social service, but we come to that understanding. And we look at, okay, well, what can we share? And how can we share it in a way that's going to achieve our overall mission and goal? But again, the focus is on the whole group, not individual members. Again, using that example, I've done something, shot someone, killed someone, our whole group has pressure. Who's going to be the angriest members of this group? Those on paper. If I'm on parole, I'm on probation, chances are I've been in the game a lot longer than some of the young guys. All your excuses, we can't control the shorties. We can't control the shorties. Yeah, they can. Yeah, they can. You start implementing some things and you see some market behaviors. The call I talked about when the guy got killed 2 hours after we left the room, it's 2 juveniles that killed the guy. 2 shorties that killed the guy. And then we went 24 days without a homicide. You're telling me you can't control the shorties? You know, now we can see what's really going on. Our mission of the Chicago Violence Reduction Strategy, it's a collaborative approach, bringing law enforcement, community members, social service agencies together. Again, our sole purpose here, our main purpose here, reduce group and gang-related shootings and homicides in the local community. Where this thing starts to get off track is people start talking about jobs and focusing on we got education and the parenting piece and what about and youth sports and youth activities. And yeah, everybody's right, but this group, if you're doing this, it needs to have tunnel vision. We're looking at how do we reduce our shootings and our homicides, period. Everything else you'll see will spring forth. We've sat in community meetings where we've talked about this, and the minute that we get through, it sinks in like, okay, they're serious. They're really tackling, they really know the guys to go after. They're not going to pick up everybody. They're not, okay. Then it becomes like some community brouhaha about, we need more, you know, once they start to get into that, you know that you're getting your message across. And they're starting to get a sense of it. But you can't allow this to evolve to that. There's other things that do that, but this has to stay in its lane if it's going to be successful. You know, like I talked about Boston and whatnot, that's a formula for this thing deteriorating rapidly and falling apart. It's shifting the focus. The focus has to stay on homicides and shooting. The objective, again, reducing gang and group violence by conveying a single moral voice directed to the perpetrators of the shootings and the homicides. That's the column. We actually, I'm going to explain how we do it in a minute and walk you through a column. We actually bring group members in. And we're not bringing in the chief, we're not bringing in the boss, we're not bringing in all the people that you see on the gang organizational chart. We're bringing in those red notes. That's what we're looking for. We're looking for the guys who are connected. Because all a calling is, at the end of the day, I call it two things. It's old-fashioned messaging. I don't know how many of you had this experience. I had it when I was little. When your parents bring you in, they sit you down. And there's no consequences coming. And there's no threats or anything else on the surface, anyway. But they sit you down, and they say, hey, I know where I know who you're running. I just want to let you know, and it's a messaging. They're making us aware. It's a sit down. I also call this the honeymoon intervention. You know, I call it the honeymoon intervention because I know that you know that I know who you run with, where you run, where your drug house is, and what you're going to be doing next. Who you're beefing with, who you're allied with, how your group makes their money. I know all that. I'm letting you know right now what's coming if you keep going down this road. You know, and by no means either, don't misunderstand this strategy. It's still cops and robbers, cowboys, and that still goes on every day. This isn't a trade-off. This is an extra resources going towards, or not necessarily extra resources, but a reallocation, I should say, of resources. We've given the Chicago Police Department, and Chief Kirk is here, Chief can attest to it, we've given them no money. We've given them a lot of heartache. We've given them a lot of assignments. We've given them a lot of extra work in some respects. But the idea is this something that's going to work? Does it make sense for you? If it doesn't make sense for you, then no, it's not a good fit. But if it makes sense for you, what do? You find a way to make it work. My kid picked up a lacrosse stick for the first time in his life this year as a freshman in high school, and he fell in love with lacrosse. So I had to sit down with my wife and figure out how to make this thing work. Because we got 3 other boys behind him. They're all playing different sports. And lacrosse is like a version of hockey, where you got to pay a whole lot of money for this kid to run around with this stick. And I'm like, we already play football, son. Like, really? We got to do this too? I grew up in New Jersey, so I was a lacrosse player in high school as well. So I get it. But what do we do as a family? What do we do every day as families, as heads of household, as employees, as employers? We find ways to make it work. If we believe in something or we see something as a necessity, we find a way we make it work. You know, and that's something that the police department has been committed to, as well as our other partners. But you deliver the message directly. It's not get an at-risk kid who's a single-parent household, who is on the fringe of joke. No. You get the guy who's on that paper, and you sit him down in the room, and you talk to him and everybody else. And you know what you do? You bring in a representative from each of those factions in your area. Not just one at a time. You bring them all in. They're not going to kill each other and shoot each other. And what about security? You got the U.S. Attorney in the room. You got the FBI in the room, the ATF in the room, the police chief in the room. Your room is never going to be safer at any point in time. If you have it at the Kroc Center, I can assure you one thing. Your crime rate at the Kroc Center will completely dissipate and disappear. Because they're going to all relate the Kroc Center to the FBI, the DEA, the U.S. Attorney, the police chief, and that experience there. The guys that don't show up, and this is the whole point of this, is you want to get the message out that this is how we're going to deal with it. So that's why you have to deliver it directly to the guys, again, those red notes, the guys who are connected, who can deliver the message. And we'll get into voluntaries a little bit later. Even guys who don't come, who aren't on paper, you invite them to come anyway. And you go to your police chief and your district command staff, and you say, who needs to be in this room? And you respect what they say. Because they're the boots on the ground, and they know who's causing the issues right now. And who's likely to be the next person, not just to pull the trigger, but the next one to receive a bullet on the other end. Again, it's a smaller group. Deliver the message of immediate change, ongoing support, swift accountability by all the stakeholders. So everybody's on it. Just like law enforcement, if I commit that homicide or that shooting, my whole group gets that full court press by all the enforcement departments. We're all having a drop every other week. We're all getting our parole compliance checks at 3 o'clock in the morning, every 2 Thursdays. You know, we're just nonstop pressure on the group. Until we say, you know what, enough, man, like that's that group accountability piece. But the same thing with social services. I just made this the social service side and this the gangbang side. So I'm sorry, for the sake of making this an easier presentation, we will remain the group members. So don't name yourselves though. Don't pay homage to that. The social service group, on the social service side, we have to have partners that can step up the same way our law enforcement steps up. If we say, if you reach out for help, you go to the top of the pile, because you're going to be deemed a crisis candidate. That person better be seen or heard the minute they call. You need to have someone 24/7 ready to talk to these guys, receive these guys, and put them at the top of the pile. Because where this does not work is if you don't keep your word. We had guys come in, and we do it a little differently in Chicago. We see, and part of it is it's kind of how I see it. You know, as a father, I know if you want to do something for me, don't do anything for me. You do something for one of my boys. You do something for a molest child. No matter how much I despise you, hate you, can't stand you, you don't wish the worst upon you, you always have a place at my table. Because you did something for my kid. And it's the same thing with some of these guys. Their fathers, their husbands, their uncles, some of them. They are. Some of them are. I can probably count them on my hand. They don't like commitment. That's why they do what they do. That's the laugh a little bit, but what's the ongoing support? And is it swift? Is it immediate? Again, we're looking for immediate change. Because we actually had a guy who came in and basically cussed everybody out. Forget you, forget the police, forget the superintendent, forget this program, forget this building, forget all y'all. But my sister, she needs a, and here we go. Another guy came, and the sister got a place to stay in a shelter with her son. The sister's boyfriend, which was his nephew, which was driving him, not necessarily his sister, it was him looking at his nephew's need and wanting to provide for his nephew's need. And then also the sister's boyfriend got in the GED program, ended up doing a little bit better. But right after that happened, literally 1 or 2 days after that, within 48 hours, 8 guys come walking in that agency, sent by the guy that read note, who was at the call. He didn't care for the services. That's okay, he's a grown man, makes his own choices. But he saw, but it was the response of that agency to his sister, his nephew, and the sister's baby's father, if you will. That immediate response let him know they're legitimate. And since they're legitimate, you guys right here go in there. And who would ever think that a gang member would send other gang members who could possibly be earning him money in for services to get them off the street? Now, we think that's wonderful, and that's how I've become a little more cynical over the years. And I know if he's smart, he's identifying who's going to rat him out down the road. Because his exact words to the agency representative and the case manager was, these guys aren't really cut for this. And I think they thought like, wow, he's really looking out for us. I think he was looking out for himself. Like, these guys are going to get me jammed up with something.